Good day. Welcome to the Polite Company Network, where we never talk about politics or religion. So today I wanted to talk to you about a subject that's very dear to my heart. It's why churches tend to suck really bad right now. Um, it's mostly to deal with the leadership. And, everyone's got a complaint, but this one's very important, especially if you care about society, your family, anything in general. Pastors today have fallen into this trance where they're effective plate spinners. Have you ever seen plate spinners? Basically, these entertainers that have these poles where they put a plate and they spin it, keep it going, and they go and they put up another pole and spin it, keep it going, and they get about 10 going at a time, but then they got to run back to the first one and spin it, and then you just keep them all going, keep all the plates spinning, and you do that until you expire. And I've seen a lot of churches that are very effective at this. They think they're doing something. They think they're busy. They're busy doing things, but for some reason they're never pushing the needle for society. They're unable to make any impact in their communities. They're just spinning plates. And even in the pulpit, you have this issue where conservative churches tend to be caught up in expository preaching. Now, I will say, expository preaching is good. But what most people and most elders think is expository preaching effectively just becomes teaching a text and exegeting it, explaining it to some degree, and then just floating it out there. Hey guys, this is kind of what this means. Take it in, do whatever you will with it, go with God. Vaya con Dios. The problem is that's not really preaching. That's only teaching. That's teaching a text. One of my favorite professors ended up saying that most expository preaching effectively comes off as a glorified Bible study. And so here's the question. If you're unable to move the souls of men, that you have their attention week in and week out, if you're unable to move them into action or do anything, change their minds, get them to behave differently in a godly manner with more righteousness and holiness, if you're unable to do that, you're certainly unable to move the culture, move your community. There's no reason for anyone to come to your church if you can't do the simple work of saying this is what a passage says, and this is how you ought to apply it, and this is how it ought to change you, and how your life should be different. But churches today, they just get stuck in spinning the plates. Hey, we're going to work our way through this passage over the next 6 months. Hey, we're going to continue doing business meetings, and just spinning those plates, doing what it takes to administer the church, rather than actually change lives. And so what you end up having is a bunch of liberal churches who aren't constrained by anything, really, and they're very activist. They're having conventions for alternative lifestyles. They're pushing legislation. They're writing their congressmen. They're doing everything to make society worse. And things like that are completely neutral. You can't say, oh, well, that's just a liberal trait. No, this is exactly what conservative churches ought to be doing. Samuel Rutherford, for example, who wrote the famous Lex Rex, one of the interesting things about what we have from history from him is that about a third of his corpus of writings, all the writings that we knew that he actually existed and he actually wrote, about a third of his writings were two individuals who were in leadership in the civil realm, whether it's magistrates, mayors, judges, whatever. And so he spent a great deal of his content creation, if you will, speaking to the local authorities, trying to build a better Christian society for his congregation and for his country. And, that's conservative. But today, you would not find a conservative preacher or elder who is engaging in that. And In fact, even in like Presbyterian circles, that's kind of verboten. You don't do it. Oh, you don't need to make an idol out of the civil realm. Yeah. That's kind of the argumentation that you hear out of people. And so I think that is why a lot of conservative churches tend to suck right now. It's because the elders don't have the cojones to actually influence people in their pulpits, and in turn, because they're unable to do that, they don't have the moral authority or the desire, the view, the scope, the vision to influence their communities and their societies as whole. And so what ends up happening is you just have this paralysis by not even analysis, just paralysis. Oh, we're going to stick to what we know, we're going to do it. And really what ends up happening is a lot of these churches just expire over time. The pastor's getting through book after book of the Bible, which is great, but really they lack on the application side. And so the church as a whole aren't really moving or growing or doing anything like that. If you believe the Word of God is living and is beneficial, then you really need to connect what you're teaching and what society can do with it. Because this is how the laity, the members in the pews, are going to understand things. I think we have a really big disconnect between pastors who are purely academic and thinking of, okay, I gotta dissect this passage, I gotta go to the Greek, which you do. I gotta understand the grammar, I gotta understand the context, I gotta put in the lexical range of each word. Very important stuff. But that's the extent of their work. They spend 20 hours a week prepping and understanding a sermon, but they never really connect it to the people, how they ought to engage it, how it's supposed to influence your life or the lives of your community. And so it becomes a very difficult situation where you're preaching, but really you're just teaching. You're teaching a passage, and it doesn't benefit anyone. Maybe that's a little too harsh, but in reality, if people aren't being moved to do something, faith without works is kind of dead, And I think that's the point that they're getting at. If your faith doesn't make someone respond and change, then what benefit is that sermon? Truthfully. Like, oh, I'm fortifying my faith. Oh, that's great. It's for my own personal edification. That's great. But if it's not actually changing and creating something that is visibly different in that person, then what's the point? Now, in future posts, I will talk about early churches, how they had closed worship services. Some of them actually required you to give up your profession in order to join the church. My goodness, what a scandal that would be today if you said, well, you know what? You teach science at the 8th grade level at a public school. If you want to become a member of this church, you got to not teach ever again, at least not in the public schools, and not teach the curriculum that they teach. You would hear scandals and lawsuits come out of that, but that's what the early church did. He said, you know what? Some of your professions you can't do. You can't be a gladiator and slay people. But that's for another video. So, again, churches today engage in paralysis. They're taught at seminaries how to rightly divide passages. Some of them teach it, most of them don't. And then the pastors, that they just get set in creating sermons. Half their work in a week is study of that passage and crafting a sermon. And for what benefit is that? That's going to cause a bit of an issue, I'm sure. But truthfully, if it takes you 20 hours to understand a passage and to explain it and to preach it, again, not a lot of preaching is happening. And I guess before I cut this off, I need to explain the difference between teaching and preaching. Teaching a passage is breaking it down so that people can understand the content. But preaching it is proclaiming it into people's lives so that not only do they have the head knowledge, but they have the imperative that this passage ought to change them, or they ought to do something with this passage, or it has some implication in their lives. Now, often a lot of people who preach exegetically, they say, oh, well, I do have some application in there. And usually it's tacked in at the end, or it's very light. It's like, oh, well, allow this faith, find purchase in your heart. And you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, we need to have faith. Reading the Bible and understanding the Bible ought to give us faith. But what are we supposed to do with that faith? And if a pastor doesn't know how to answer that, it's because really they have moral ambiguity about what a Christian life is about to be about. So, I hope this is a fun first video for everyone. I'm actually writing a book right now, which I hope to finish. I'm developing my disciplines of trying to write 3 pages per day, every day, no matter what. Stephen King, he does like 5 or 10 pages a day, come hell or high water, and that's his discipline in order to produce. So I'm starting off with 3, trying to get this done, and I'll let you know how it goes. All right. Thanks, and God bless.